Nathan Dawson's world shattered when he discovered that his fiancée, Jessica Miller, had been secretly involved with his father, Mark Dawson. What began as a hidden affair spiraled into a devastating revelation. Jessica was infected with HIV, a disease passed to her by the very man who had been a father figure to Nathan. As secrets unraveled and lies surfaced, the consequences were far more devastating than anyone could have imagined. This is the tragic true crime story of betrayal, deception, and the ultimate price paid in the wake of a secret affair. The Dawson family seemed like the picture of success, living in the peaceful town of Maple Ridge, a place where everyone knew everyone else. Mark Dawson, a 50-year-old businessman, was the kind of man everyone looked up to. He had built a fortune from scratch, becoming a prominent philanthropist and a respected figure in the community. His wife, Carol, was a kind-hearted woman who was actively involved in local charities. Together they raised their only son, Nathan, who had grown up admiring his father. Nathan was a model young man, driven, athletic, and well-liked by everyone around him. The family had everything they could ever want: money, status, respect. From the outside, they were perfect. Nathan's life seemed to fall perfectly into place when he met Jessica. She was 25, vibrant, and full of life. Jessica, an elementary school teacher, had moved to Maple Ridge to start a new chapter after college. It wasn't long before she and Nathan became inseparable. Their love blossomed quickly, and before long, they were planning their wedding. Nathan, thrilled to bring someone so special into his family, couldn't wait to introduce her to his parents. Carol was thrilled with the match. Mark, however, seemed to take a more reserved stance. He was polite, supportive even, but something about the situation didn't sit right with him. Still, Nathan's happiness mattered more than anything to him, and he brushed aside any lingering doubts. Jessica quickly became part of the Dawson family fabric. She was invited to family dinners, weekend barbecues, and holiday gatherings. The bond between her and Mark was undeniable. He was the patriarch of the family, and she was the bright, enthusiastic young woman who seemed eager to embrace the family's wealth and lifestyle. It was easy for her to fit in. She charmed everyone with her wit and beauty. But beneath the surface, something more complicated was brewing, something neither Nathan nor Jessica could see coming. Mark had always been the type of man who got what he wanted, a man who prided himself on his control. But his control was beginning to slip in ways he never anticipated. It was one evening, a few months after Jessica had become engaged to Nathan, that Mark found himself alone with her in the study. Nathan had been out with friends, and Carol was in the kitchen preparing dinner. The house was quiet, and the air between them was charged. It was meant to be a casual conversation about wedding details, but Mark found himself saying things he had never intended. Jessica, flattered by his attention, found herself drawn to him in a way she hadn't expected. What started as innocent flirtation quickly turned into something much darker. Neither of them knew exactly how it happened, but one night, they found themselves crossing a line neither of them could undo. Their first kiss was unplanned, a brief moment that caught them both off guard. But from that point on, the relationship escalated. They began meeting in secret under the guise of business trips or long walks. Mark, much older than Jessica, took advantage of her naivety and his own charm, coaxing her deeper into the affair. It wasn't just the physical connection, it was a mental game. Mark knew how to play the role of a lover and a mentor. He made Jessica feel special, like she was the only one who truly understood him. And for a while she believed it. She had everything she could ever want. A man who was powerful, wealthy, and willing to give her a life that Nathan, in his youth and ambition, couldn't yet offer. As the affair continued, Jessica's guilt grew. She had always been a woman of integrity, someone who believed in the sanctity of relationships, but the allure of Mark's experience and control was intoxicating. She struggled with her emotions. She loved Nathan. He was kind and good-hearted, but Mark's presence was consuming. The secrecy of it, the thrill of sneaking around, made her feel alive in a way she hadn't anticipated. But guilt gnawed at her, eating her from the inside out. The deeper she fell into the affair, the harder it became to see a way out. The facade she maintained with Nathan and the rest of the Dawson family became harder to keep up. The truth was buried beneath layers of lies, and with every lie the stakes grew higher. Jessica tried to ignore the growing sense of dread in the pit of her stomach, but her subconscious was always a step ahead. She could feel the walls closing in. Nathan, on the other hand, remained oblivious to the dangerous web unfolding around him. His life was consumed with wedding plans and his own ambitions. He loved Jessica with everything he had, and he couldn't fathom the betrayal that had taken root in his own home. He trusted his father. He trusted Jessica. He was about to lose everything, and yet, he couldn't see it coming. Meanwhile, Mark and Jessica's affair continued to escalate behind closed doors. It was a secret that was already beginning to eat away at the very fabric of their lives. Little did they know, it would only take one fateful moment for their entire world to shatter. Jessica's health began to decline in ways she couldn't ignore. At first it was subtle, fatigue that she chalked up to stress, occasional headaches she blamed on long hours spent preparing for the wedding. But as time went on, the symptoms became more severe. Her once vibrant skin started to look dull, and she lost weight rapidly. She attributed the changes to the pressures of planning a wedding, the looming expectations of being part of the Dawson family, and the mounting guilt over her affair. But then, the rashes started. First, a few small patches on her arms, then larger ones across her back. She tried to ignore them, telling herself it was just the stress manifesting in her body. But when she fainted one morning at a bridal fitting, things became impossible to dismiss. Her friends rushed her to the doctor, where she was immediately tested for various conditions. The results were inconclusive at first, but her doctor, a kind woman who had known Jessica since her childhood, ordered more tests. It was those tests that revealed the unthinkable. Jessica was HIV positive. The news hit Jessica like a sledgehammer. She had been with only one man since she had met Nathan, and the thought of being infected with HIV was incomprehensible to her. The doctor reassured her that they would take the necessary steps to manage the virus, but Jessica felt like her entire world was spinning out of control. How could this have happened? Her mind raced through the events of the past few months, and she found herself back in the dark corners of the affair with Mark. The pieces started to fall into place. She had trusted him. She had trusted him in ways she shouldn't have. And now, she realized that the man who had been more than just a lover, who had been a figure of authority, someone who had groomed her and manipulated her, was the source of her illness. Her heart sank as the truth hit her fully. Mark Dawson, Nathan's father, had infected her. There was no other explanation. No, she had been careful with Nathan, always protective and cautious, yet here she was carrying a virus that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She could never tell Nathan the truth. The betrayal was too much to bear, and revealing it would destroy him, his family, and their future. She couldn't bring herself to be the one to break his heart. The weight of this secret bore heavily on her as she spiraled into isolation. Her guilt, compounded by the betrayal of both Nathan and herself, overwhelmed her. As she watched her reflection in the mirror, she saw the woman she used to be slipping away, replaced by someone haunted by a truth too painful to speak. It wasn't just the physical toll the virus was taking on her body. It was the emotional weight, the constant fear of being discovered. Jessica began to distance herself from Nathan, unable to face him with the knowledge she now carried. She made excuses to avoid intimate moments, telling him she was tired, stressed, or simply not feeling well. The man who had once been the love of her life now felt like a distant stranger, a painful reminder of everything she could never tell him. Every time he looked at her with love and concern, it twisted something deep inside her. She loved him, but her heart was breaking under the strain of the lies. Mark, too, seemed to sense that something was wrong. He'd been careful, almost too careful, to keep his affair with Jessica a secret. But now, seeing her withdraw from Nathan, something felt off. At first he assumed it was just cold feet about the wedding. He had expected this from the start. Jessica, a young woman getting overwhelmed by the life she was about to step into. But the distance she was putting between them had him worried. He started to question whether she was on the verge of exposing everything, and the fear of their secret coming to light made him uncomfortable. Still, Mark wasn't ready to let go of the power he held over Jessica. Even though she was pulling away, he continued to manipulate her, trying to keep her close, feeding her lies about how she needed to stay quiet for Nathan's sake. But deep inside, Mark knew the truth couldn't stay hidden forever. He knew it would only be a matter of time before the cracks in the perfect facade they had built would start to show. Jessica, meanwhile, was nearing a breaking point. The physical toll of the virus was becoming undeniable. She could barely keep up with her usual routines, and her once spirited personality was slowly fading away. Every moment felt like she was suffocating under the weight of the life she had built and the choices she had made. She had once believed that this affair, this forbidden love with Mark, had been her escape, but now it had become her prison. Her health was deteriorating, and she knew she had to face the reality of her situation. But how could she face the people she loved when she had destroyed everything? How could she look at Nathan knowing she had been unfaithful, knowing she had brought something deadly into his life? Every day it felt like the walls were closing in on her. She had no way out. The secret was too deep, too toxic, and no matter how much she tried to ignore it, it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. Jessica's story was one of love, betrayal, and ultimately the destruction of her life. The consequences of a secret affair and the reckless choices made by those who thought they could hide their sins were beginning to manifest in ways that would soon change everything. The devastating truth was still buried, but time was running out. As Jessica's physical condition worsened, her mind became a prison of guilt and fear. The weight of her illness was undeniable, but it was the emotional burden, the knowledge that she was carrying a secret so heavy it could destroy the lives of everyone around her, that made each day feel unbearable. Nathan, who had once been her source of joy, now seemed like a distant figure. Every time he looked at her with that warm, caring smile, it twisted something inside her. She knew she was lying to him, and the lies were eating her alive. The guilt gnawed at her, but she couldn't bring herself to tell him the truth. She couldn't face the consequences of her actions, knowing that revealing the truth about Mark's betrayal would tear apart the life they had built together. The affair with Mark had already cost her more than she was willing to admit. What started as a harmless flirtation had spiraled into an uncontrollable whirlwind of deceit and betrayal. And now, the consequences of that betrayal were becoming far too real. Jessica felt trapped, her body slowly succumbing to the virus that had been passed on to her in the darkest of ways. She had become a prisoner of her own choices, unable to break free from the web she had woven. Mark, on the other hand, seemed to be growing more distant. His fear of being exposed was palpable, but he never once questioned the actions that had brought him to this point. For him, the affair with Jessica had been a conquest, something that fueled his ego and sense of control. He had been the one in charge, the one who dictated the terms of their relationship. He was the one who had controlled the situation, keeping everything under wraps. But the cracks were starting to show, and he could feel the pressure mounting. His life, once perfectly ordered, was beginning to unravel. Jessica's illness was becoming harder to ignore. She had stopped attending social events, stopped meeting with friends, and stopped being the vibrant, energetic woman everyone had once known. She spent more time alone, retreating into herself. Nathan began to notice the changes, the increasing distance between them. He tried to comfort her, tried to understand what was happening, but Jessica pushed him away. The tension between them grew as the days went on, and Nathan became more and more frustrated. He didn't understand why she was pulling away, why she was becoming a shell of the woman he had once known. But he had no idea about the darkness she was hiding. The affair had always been a secret, something they thought could remain hidden forever. But now, as Jessica's health continued to decline and the lies grew more difficult to maintain, the truth felt inevitable. Jessica knew it was only a matter of time before someone figured it out, before Nathan discovered what had been happening behind his back. The thought of him finding out, of losing him forever, terrified her, and yet, in some twisted way, it seemed like the only way to end the torment. She was suffocating under the weight of her lies, and the thought of it all coming to light was the only thing that seemed to offer any kind of relief. Mark, sensing the impending disaster, became more possessive. He reached out to Jessica, urging her to keep quiet, to stay silent for Nathan's sake. He didn't want their affair exposed, not just because of the destruction it would cause, but because it would threaten everything he had built. His reputation, his position in the community, his family, all of it would come crashing down. And so, he continued to manipulate Jessica, keeping her under his control, feeding her lies about how everything could still be fixed if they just stayed quiet. He reminded her that Nathan loved her, that they could move past this, that she could get better with the right treatment. But Jessica wasn't getting better. The physical toll of the virus was becoming too much for her to ignore. She couldn't pretend any longer. One morning she woke up feeling too weak to even get out of bed. Her body felt like it was betraying her, each ache and pain a reminder of the choices she had made. She lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of her actions bearing down on her. She realized in that moment that she couldn't keep running from the truth. The secret was too big, too dangerous, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. It wasn't just the physical symptoms that were making her sick. It was the emotional toll of the affair, the guilt of what she had done to Nathan, and the knowledge that she could never undo the damage she had caused. She felt like she was dying, not just from the virus, but from the inside out. The life she had once dreamed of, marriage to Nathan, a future together, was slipping away from her. The love she had for him was still there, buried beneath the lies and the guilt, but it felt like a distant memory. As Jessica sank deeper into despair, Mark continued his charade. He knew that Jessica was fading, but he refused to acknowledge the reality of the situation. He kept pushing her to stay quiet, to stay in control, all while continuing to keep his own secrets hidden. But Jessica couldn't keep the facade up any longer. The truth was breaking through, and it was becoming impossible to ignore. In the quiet of her room, with the weight of everything crashing down on her, Jessica finally made a decision. She knew what she had to do, even if it meant losing everything. She had to tell Nathan the truth. The lies had gone on long enough, and the consequences of those lies were now too great to ignore. She didn't know how Nathan would react, but she couldn't live with the guilt any longer. The truth was her only chance at redemption, even if it meant sacrificing everything she had ever wanted. Jessica sat in her car, parked in front of the Dawson family home, heart pounding in her chest. She stared at the front door, wondering how she was ever going to face Nathan with the truth. Her palms were clammy, and her thoughts raced in circles. How could she tell him? How could she explain the depths of the betrayal she had inflicted upon him, upon his family, The lies she had spun had grown so complex that even she wasn't sure where to begin. All she knew was that she couldn't hide any longer. The weight of the secret had become unbearable. Her hands shook as she clutched the steering wheel, trying to steady her breathing. The affair with Mark had started innocently enough, but it had spiraled out of control in ways she never imagined. What had started as a dangerous, flirtatious connection had turned into something that would change all of their lives forever. And now, the consequences of that affair were beginning to manifest in ways that couldn't be ignored. She was sick, her body deteriorating from the virus Mark had infected her with. She couldn't continue pretending everything was fine. It was time to confront the truth. With a final deep breath, Jessica got out of the car and walked to the door. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the ground itself was pushing back against her. She knocked, her hand trembling as it made contact with the wood. The sound echoed in her ears, amplifying the silence that seemed to envelop her. A few seconds passed before the door opened. Nathan stood there looking at her with a smile that instantly made her heart ache. He was so innocent, so unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. "Jessica, hey, I was just thinking about you," he said, his voice warm and welcoming. She forced a smile, but it felt strained, unnatural. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan's smile faltered for a moment, his brow furrowing with concern. "Of course. What's wrong?" She paused, her throat tight. The words were there, but they felt lodged in her chest. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times, but now that it was here, she couldn't find the strength to speak. Nathan took a step forward, his hand gently resting on her arm. "You're scaring me. What's going on, Jessica?" She looked at him, seeing the love in his eyes, and it almost broke her. How could she destroy him like this? How could she explain the impossible? But there was no going back. The truth needed to be told. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice trembling. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Nathan's face shifted from confusion to concern, his grip tightening on her arm. "You're scaring me. What is it?" The words felt like they were caught in her throat. She could feel the heaviness of what was about to happen. "Nathan, I've been lying to you," she began, tears welling up in her eyes. "About everything. About me." Nathan blinked, a look of disbelief crossing his face. "What are you talking about?" Jessica's chest tightened and she fought to keep herself together. She could see his confusion, his genuine concern, and it made this moment even harder to bear. "I'm not the woman you think I am. I've been seeing your father, behind your back, for months." Nathan's face went pale. The world seemed to stop moving as the gravity of Jessica's words sank in. She saw the confusion turn to shock, then to anger, then to something far worse. Betrayal. What?" His voice was hoarse, the disbelief clear in his eyes. No, that can't be true. He stepped back as though the words she had just said had physically pushed him away. "I didn't want this. I didn't want it to happen, but it did," Jessica said, her voice barely audible. "Mark, he infected me. I've been sick, Nathan. I've been carrying HIV and I didn't know what to do. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't ruin everything." Nathan's face contorted, his hands shaking as they reached up to grip his head. "No, this can't be happening." His voice cracked, raw emotion flooding through him. "How could you do this? How could you do this to me, to us?" "I was wrong," Jessica whispered, her voice breaking. "I am so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I didn't know how to stop. It was like I was trapped and I couldn't find a way out." Nathan stumbled back, his anger shifting to a deep unspoken hurt. "You were sleeping with my father, my own father, and now, you've... He couldn't finish the sentence. The reality of the situation was too much for him to bear. Jessica reached out, but Nathan recoiled, his expression one of pure disbelief and devastation. She had no idea how to fix this, how to undo the damage that had been done. She could feel her world collapsing around her, the foundation of everything she had built with Nathan crumbling before her eyes. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, her voice a mere whisper. "I don't even know if you can ever look at me the same way again. But I had to tell you. You deserve to know the truth." Nathan stood there frozen in place, his face pale, his hands trembling. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The silence between them stretched out, heavy and suffocating. Jessica turned away, her heart breaking as she walked away from him. She knew the damage was done. The love they once shared was gone, replaced by a wound too deep to heal. There was no coming back from this. She had destroyed everything, and there was no way to undo it. The truth had set her free, but in doing so it had shattered her world. The days that followed were a blur of raw emotions and fractured relationships. Jessica had expected Nathan to be devastated, to lash out in anger or disbelief, but the silence between them spoke volumes. After she had confessed, Nathan had left the house, refusing to speak to her, refusing to acknowledge her existence. She had never seen him so cold, so distant. The man she had once loved with all her heart was now a stranger to her, and the weight of it felt like a crushing weight on her chest. In the hours that followed, Jessica sat alone in the empty house, her thoughts consumed by guilt, regret, and an overwhelming sense of loss. The shame of her actions felt like a constant presence, a dark shadow that followed her everywhere she went. She had ruined everything. The future she had imagined with Nathan, the love they had shared, was now irreparably shattered. The consequences of her affair with Mark were now all too clear, and she had no one to blame but herself. Mark, of course, had tried to call her multiple times after the confrontation, but Jessica couldn't bring herself to answer. What could she say to him? What words could undo the damage they had both caused? He was the man who had initiated the affair, the man who had infected her, but he had never once taken responsibility for his actions. He had continued to manipulate her, to twist the situation in his favor, convincing her that they could somehow keep everything hidden, that they could keep up the facade of a perfect life. But the truth was now out, and there was no going back. Jessica's health continued to deteriorate in the days following her confession. The physical toll of the HIV virus was starting to take its toll on her body, leaving her feeling weak, tired, and unable to keep up with the world around her. The virus was a constant reminder of the choices she had made, and the thought of facing the rest of her life with this secret was something she couldn't unbear. But it wasn't just the physical symptoms that weighed heavily on her, it was the emotional aftermath. The guilt, the shame, the overwhelming realization that she had destroyed not just her own life, but the lives of the people she cared about the most. Nathan would never forgive her. He could never forgive her for what she had done. And Mark, well, he was already moving on as he always did, without a second thought for the mess he had left behind. As Jessica sat in the silence of the house, her mind spiraled further into despair. She had been so naive, so blind to the consequences of her actions. She had believed that she could somehow control the situation, that she could hide the affair, keep it a secret, and continue on with her life as though nothing had changed. But the truth had a way of catching up with you, and now it had exposed everything, ripping apart the lives of everyone involved. Nathan finally reached out to her a few days later, his voice on the other end of the phone cold and distant. "I can't do this anymore, Jessica," he said, his words like a knife to her heart. I don't know who you are anymore. I don't even know if I can look at you. What you did to me, to my family, it's unforgivable." Her heart sank at his words. She knew they were true. She knew that she could never undo the damage she had caused, never fix the broken trust between them. He was right. There was no going back. She had betrayed him in the worst possible way, and now he was paying the price for her mistakes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I never meant to hurt you." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Nathan finally spoke again, his voice was quieter, but there was still a hardness to it. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you, Jessica. I need some space. I need time to think." And with that, the call ended. Jessica sat in the silence, the weight of his words sinking in. She had lost him. She had lost everything. There was no redemption for her, no second chance. She had crossed a line that could never be undone, and now she would have to live with the consequences. Days turned into weeks, and Jessica's life became a haze of loneliness and regret. She continued to battle the virus inside her, her body weakening with each passing day. She knew that she needed to seek treatment, but the thought of facing doctors, of facing the reality of her illness, felt like an insurmountable task. How could she explain this to anyone? How could she admit the truth to herself, let alone to others? As for Mark, he had all but disappeared from her life. She saw him at the occasional community event, where he pretended like nothing had ever happened, like their affair had never existed. He had moved on, as he always did, leaving destruction in his wake while continuing to live his life without consequences. Jessica had been nothing more than a passing indulgence, and now she was left to pick up the pieces of her broken life alone. Nathan, meanwhile, had distanced himself from his father completely. He had moved out of the Dawson family home, taking a job in another town, far away from the people who had betrayed him. He had no desire to confront Mark, no desire to rebuild the shattered relationship with the man who had not only betrayed his trust but had also inflicted a lasting wound on his heart. Jessica spent her days in solitude, the silence of her home serving as a constant reminder of her mistakes. She would never know if Nathan could ever forgive her, but the hope that he might one day find it in his heart to do so seemed more and more distant with each passing day. In the end, there was no resolution. There was no redemption. Jessica had made choices that had destroyed her life, and now, there was nothing left but the painful reality of her actions. She could never undo what had been done. The truth had been exposed, and the damage had been done. The story of her affair, of her betrayal, would linger in the background of her life forever, and she would have to live with the consequences for the rest of her days.